All right, Jen.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jan Edwards, president of the Montrose League of Women Voters, which serves also Delta and Ouray Counties. The League is a nonpartisan political organization, which means we never endorse any political party or candidate. The League seeks to empower and inform the voting public, providing education and advocacy regarding issues of importance to all of us. So how are you doing? Seems a basic question, right? But what is the answer for all of us in Colorado? Through so many varied and significant changes over the past year, and with more to come as we are all trying to look for and look forward to normal, how are we all doing? What are the different and shared issues that we are bringing with us that will determine the answer to that question going forward? To help answer that question, our presentation this afternoon, entitled The Self-Sufficiency Standard for Montrose, Delta, and Ouray Counties, will provide an insight into how the economic well-being of our population is determined, as well as some policy implications that may impact all of us. I'm sure you will find it interesting. You can also view this presentation recordings of our previous presentations, and more information about the League and our activities at our website at lwvmontrose.org. Our moderator, Susan Chandler Reed, is standing by. Thanks for watching.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Bruce Barnum from the Colorado Center on Law and Policy, who will be speaking to us about the self-sufficiency standard for Western Colorado. Bruce Barnum joined Cclp as Development Director in April 2018. In this role, Bruce works to provide consistent and ample sources of funding for Cclp to accomplish its mission of forging pathways from poverty. He also focuses on community engagement and organizational development and strategy. Bruce works with a talented team of policy advocates and changemakers at Cclp to help make a big difference in the lives of low-income folks here in his home state of Colorado. Welcome, Bruce.
Hello, everybody. Really nice to be with you this afternoon, or this noon, just afternoon. Yeah, really nice to be presenting to the League of Women Voters. A really great organization. I'm sure you're all proud to be members, as you should be. My mom is a longtime League of Women Voters member, and I've had the occasion to work with different chapters of your organization in lots of different places on lots of different issues. And you all do just tremendous work, I think, educating the public about policy issues and politics and elections and all of those important things in our society. So really a thank you from me to all of you for the work that you do as League members, and really appreciate the opportunity to be able to present to you today. So we're going to spend the next hour going through a lot of data and a lot of information. And I'm going to go over things pretty quickly. There's going to be a lot to absorb, but rest assured, I'm going to try to leave a whole bunch of time at the end for questions so we can talk through any parts that are unclear. So as we go, with that in mind, please kind of, make note of your questions, keep them in mind, jot yourself a note as I'm cruising along here through the presentation. And then at the end, we can take all of those questions, and I'm happy to go back and revisit any parts of the presentation as we do that. So save your questions for that Q&A period, but definitely keep them in mind. Usually this presentation results in lots of good questions and good discussion. So definitely part of the equation. So thanks to Susan for that very nice introduction. I really appreciate it, Susan. As she said, I am Bruce Barnum. I am with the Colorado Center on Law and Policy. I also note I'm a Western Slope native. I grew up mostly in Meeker, Colorado, about 100 miles or more north of where most of you are at, but spent my middle school and high school years out there, spent a lot of sports trips down to Paonia and Cedar Edge and Hotchkiss and a bunch of those places that were in our conference down there. So definitely a part of the state I'm personally familiar with. Still love to come out there when I can get out there with some do a little camping with the family or some snowshoeing. So yeah, always nice to present to a group from the Western Slope in particular. So let me get the presentation started here by just giving you a little overview of Cclp. So that's where I work again. It's been around about 23 years, statewide policy organization. We work on issues especially of healthcare policy and family economic security. And overall, our mission is to advocate for low-income Coloradans. So we're fundamentally an anti-poverty organization. We're trying to solve those problems in our society that cause, exacerbate, and perpetuate poverty. So definitely good work. And as Susan mentioned in the introduction, I get to work with a lot of really talented people. We have a lot of attorneys and advocates on our staff who are out there every day helping make policy change for folks. A little history on the organization. We came about in the 90s because there were some changes in federal regulation that prevented Colorado Legal Services, which is our sister organization, from doing policy advocacy. So they're the organization that exists to provide legal services for low-income folks. So if you need an attorney for yourself in some civil matter, you can go to them. But we are essentially the policy flip side of that. So we work on the policy issues. And the report I'm going to share with you today is part of our research effort. So we do policy and advocacy work, but a big part of that, as you might imagine, is research. We have to know what we're talking about, first of all, but also it's really important for us to have a research team. We have 3 folks that work on our research team currently, professional researchers. And not only do they inform the work that we do, but they also produce reports, white papers, informational products that talk about the different issues related to poverty that are happening in the state. And really, these reports, they're good information for all of you to use in your community, but they're also used really widely by county commissioners, employment folks, state agency people, lawmakers at the Capitol here in Denver. So it's these research reports are widely used to sort of figure out the fabric of our state, how things work together. So it's an important piece of work for us. And the report that I'm sharing with you today, first and foremost, and I'm going to share a little data from a couple other things we've done more recently. But the main thing that we'll be looking at is the self-sufficiency standard. It's SSS up there. And that fundamentally is a report that shows us very detailed cost of living data by county for every county in Colorado. So all 64 counties, including the 3 we'll be looking at today, where you all are located. And we'll get into that one in a minute, but we're also going to really look at the overlooked and undercounted report. So that's a companion report, and that really talks about the demographics of people who are not meeting self-sufficiency. And then we have a third report, companion report with that set called On the Road, and it's about pathways to economic security. That one I'm going to share with you just where you can access it and read it. We're not going to get into that one in too much depth with the time we have today. We're going to really focus on those first 2. And then I am going to share with you a couple of slides from our just recently released State of Working Colorado report. And that's an annual report we do that talks about the state of income and the workforce in Colorado. And there's some interesting data in there about, especially this pandemic year we've been having, what's been happening in Colorado. So I'll give you a little update from that too. So what is the self-sufficiency standard? So we're going to start with that first report, the core report, self-sufficiency standard for Colorado. As I said, it's a really detailed measure of cost of living. So something you may have heard of, I'm sure you've heard of, is the federal poverty standard. So when they talk about people in poverty, people below the poverty line, they're talking about this federal poverty measure. So that's on your left there. And it's a really simplistic calculation that's done at the federal level for that federal poverty line. It basically just says, we think somebody's food cost is a third of their budget. And then so we just triple it. So we say, well, what we think somebody pays for groceries, we're going to triple that. We're going to say that's the poverty standard. So it's a very simple calculation, doesn't take into account the exact cost of a lot of goods, really just looks at food and groceries. And it therefore, in our view, is highly insufficient. The other big problem with the federal poverty standard is it is not calibrated to geography. So that calculation is done on average for the entire US of A, and it doesn't vary. So federal poverty line is the same whether you live in, Grand Junction or Detroit or Miami or Seattle or, any other place you can think of in the whole country. Hawaii, Alaska, doesn't matter. Federal poverty line is the same. And of course, the cost of living in all those places is a lot different. So the reason we do the self-sufficiency standard report is to have a much more detailed and exact calculation of cost of living for folks. So that calculation is on the right. You can see self-sufficiency standard is made up of a whole bunch of different factors. So we look at childcare, housing, we look at medical care, we look at transportation, we look at groceries, we look at clothing, extra expenses. So we look at really a very detailed overview of all of the things that people actually pay for. So it's not a simplistic calculation. It's a pretty complex one. Requires us to extract a lot of data on the cost of a lot of different things. And it's broken down not just specific to Colorado, but it's broken down specific to every county in Colorado. So we have a self-sufficiency standard calculated for every single one of the 64 counties. So it's a very precise measure, and it's a real world measure. It's not sort of this estimate. You can also see just the overall calculation is a lot different. When we calculate all the expenses that somebody tends to face on average, we get a much different calculation. So the real cost of living, once we understand it, is a lot different than the poverty line, and we think it makes a lot more sense from a policy standpoint to use that because it reflects people's actual expenses. All right, and not only that, but the self-sufficiency standard is also calculated based on your family type. So that means in each of the 64 counties, and this is just a screenshot, it says Larimer County, but what you can do, this calculator is actually available on our website. So you can go to the self-sufficiency standard section of our website. You can pull up this calculator. You pick a county, any of the counties in the state, and then you put in the family that you're thinking about. So if you got, in this case, we put in 1 adult, 2 preschool kids, but you can put in any value up to 10 in any of those categories, I think, resulting in a total of 719 family types that you can calculate for. And based on the county, the people who are in the family, and we'll talk about in a minute why it matters, how old the kids are, but based on who's in the family, we calculate the self-sufficiency standard on that basis. So not only is it county by county, it's also family by family. So we can actually look and see, okay, for 1 adult and 2 kids in this county, what is their housing cost? You can see the upper right there. What is their cost for housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, miscellaneous taxes? What is their cost for everything that they need to pay to stay alive, meet all of their basic needs? So this is basic needs. That's what we're trying to get at. So what is their cost for basic needs? And then in the middle, it tells you what the self-sufficiency wage is. So by calculating out the cost of living for somebody, ergo, we can look and say, okay, well, so in this case, the 1 adult in this family with 2 preschool kids, if they're going to meet all of their basic needs living in Larimer County, they're going to need to make about $67,500 a year. And we also have that monthly, hourly. So this gives us a very good benchmark. So we can look at this and say, okay, we know for families like this with a couple of young kids in a particular area, they need to earn at least this much, or they're not going to be meeting their basic needs. So here's why family type matters. Here's why we have all those family types in the standard to make it extra precise. So we're looking at 3 different families here. And you can see the breakdown of costs. You can see the total cost on the left. Family in the middle obviously has a lot more cost. Why? Because they have kids. So when we add kids into the equation, you'll see this consistently throughout the standard. Kids are expensive. I can tell you, I myself have a 2.5-year-old and a 2-month-old, so a brand new addition to the family. So I'm in one of these categories here with a couple of little kids, and yeah, they're not cheap. They definitely have their associated expenses. So I'm sure all of you who are parents can relate to that, or know people who are parents, and so it makes a big difference. Couple of adults, their expenses are not nearly as high, and you start moving into different kinds of families with children. Much larger total expense, and you can see it varies a lot by the age of the children. That's why we have those breakdowns. So the family in the middle that has an infant and a preschooler, childcare very expensive for kids that age because they're not in school yet. So they're not, they're not going to school all day, at public expense. They're, if they're in childcare, if the family is working, which is the assumption here, then, you need full-time childcare for both of those kids. So you can see for that family, that makes up a huge chunk of their budget, makes up a third of their budget, just the childcare piece. And then the family with a little bit older kids, a school-age child, a teenager, childcare is much less. They probably just need some in the summer for the younger kid, something like that. So it's a much smaller proportion of their budget. Although you can see with those older kids, food has gone up. They're going to eat more, especially that teenager in the house. Food's going to be a bigger chunk. And they also need a little bit more space in the house, so their housing costs can be a little bit higher. So that gives you a good breakdown why family type is important, why we calculate that, because it makes a big difference in your budget. Now we're going to do a little exercise. So this will get your mind working, allow you to kind of apply this a little bit. We're going to do this for Montrose County. Normally I would pass these out. If we were in person, I would give you each one and you could write on it. But since we're doing this over Zoom, we'll just either do this kind of in your imagination, or you can jot down what you think. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the family at the top, for an adult, a preschooler, and a school-age child, what's your guess? What's your guess for the monthly cost of housing, of childcare, food, each of those categories? What's your guess for the cost? And then if you're really fast at math, you can add it up, see what you think the income required to pay for that would be. So I'll give you just 1 minute to think about that. And this is just, and I'll tell you, we're gonna look at a little comparison side by sides for Delta and Ouray County also, but pretty similar cost-wise in those three counties, actually, as you'll see. So this is for Montrose, but it'll be applicable to the other two too. So kind of take your best guess at each of those categories. I'll give you just 30 seconds to think about that. And then I'm going to flip over to the next slide, which has the answers on it here. And we'll see how you did. All right, so this is the actual cost calculated in the standard for Montrose County. I just got to take a look at each of those and see if it compares to what you thought it was going to cost that family per month. Always interesting to see if you were a little high, a little low. One thing I do tend to hear from people pretty often is the housing seems low, and it is a little bit on the lower end, is for a couple reasons. So the standard, we're trying to calculate what it takes for a family to meet their basic needs. So just, basic needs to get by. And because we're doing that basic needs calculation, we're not looking at like the median housing costs. So a lot of times when you see housing costs, you see, what does it cost for an apartment in my county? The statistic that people will publish is the median. So, it's the median cost, and we're not looking for that. We're looking for the minimum cost. So the standard actually seeks to calculate, for a family like this, you probably can get away with a 1-bedroom apartment. What's sort of the basic cost? Not a place that's unsafe or something, but so it actually shoots a little bit at the lower end of the rental market in that case. So anyway, we'll see how you did. Maybe I'll ask you at the end to see how we did. But bottom line here, based on those expenses calculated by the standard, we can see for that adult with those 2 young kids in Montrose County, to meet basic needs, they need a monthly income of just over $4,600 a month, about $55,000 a year, or about just over $26 an hour. Be interested to see your reaction to that at the end. But I know a lot of times when we do this in person, people are like, "Oh, wow, that's a lot to meet basic needs," right? We're not talking about what would be an ideal salary or something. We're talking about what somebody needs to meet their basic needs, and it's usually a lot higher than people think it's going to be, and we think that does reflect the real cost of living. Especially in a expensive state, and we'll see some geographic comparisons. But yeah, it's a realistic calculation, but it is more than you would think in a lot of cases. So what you'll see in the in the standard, and I encourage you after the presentation or you know, at your convenience, go on our website. You can actually download the entire report. All three reports I'm talking about today, they're available high resolution PDF for download on our website. You can download them, you can print them, you know, do what you will. They're free reports available to the public for you all to use as you will. So I encourage you to go on there, but I'm just going to show you within the report, you know, and we do have hard copies in the office. If sometime we get together in person, I'll bring you some. But yeah, definitely download it from the website if you want. But what you'll see in there are these sheets for each county. So you can go into that calculator on the website. You calculate for those 719 family types, but at the in the published standard itself, we just do a few of the kind of more common family types. So we look at, you know, sort of a good few index family types, and we show you the numbers for each one of them so you can compare. And you can see circled in red there, that's that hourly wage we were looking at for adult, preschool, or school age child. I also want you to make note of that housing number 880 because we're going to do a little flip through comparison here. So it's Montrose. This one's Delta. You can see really similar. Housing cost tiny bit higher. Bottom line for that specific family type, real similar. And then here's Ouray. Ouray housing is definitely up a bit, definitely a little bit higher than the other two. The bottom line is actually not a lot different. And I was looking through this earlier, and the main difference, I'm going to flip back again. Looks like it's childcare. So Montrose County in particular, very high cost of childcare. You know, for those two kids in that family type, you're looking at $1,300 a month and a little bit more. So the housing is a little lower, but the childcare is a little bit higher. And when we flip back through Delta and then to Ouray, you can see the childcare is actually a little lower, even though the housing is higher. So that gets you to a similar similar bottom line actually in all three counties. So the what I was saying a moment ago, the overall cost of living in the three counties we're looking at today, pretty similar. So we're where I'm actually going to show you some comparison slides now with some other counties in the region because these three counties are fairly similar. There's not a lot of difference between them in terms of the calculation. So it'd be interesting just to see in some other counties how it looks. So anyway, you can see calculation there. I always do like to point out, you know, single adult on the left, in all cases, you can always see, you know, a single adult by themselves, they can get by, you know, not a whole lot of money. You know, you're looking at, you know, a little bit over $10 an hour. You can meet basic needs as just a single person by yourself. But these larger family types goes up fast, you know, to almost $30 an hour in some cases just to meet basic needs. All right, so let's do a little comparison here. So this is, actually shouldn't say Gunnison on this one, should say Montrose, but there we go, little typo. There we go. So Montrose, that same family type that we looked at before, so we're just using that one kind of as a comparison. That's at your middle, 54,000 and a little bit more to meet the basic needs for that family type. So comparing that to a couple other counties in the region, you can see Saguache County, which is a very rural county off to the east there, ways in northern San Luis Valley. That's one of the lower cost of living counties, certainly in the region. So that's kind of a low end. You can see that's significantly lower cost of living. And then for kind of a similar rural-ish county, but one that has obviously the ski industry in it, Route County, Steamboat, still some really rural parts of that county, but Steamboat certainly is not these days. So you can see their cost of living is way higher, up almost $25,000 for that family. And that's similar. I'll show you some maps here in a minute, but you'll see a similar high, really high level of cost of living in Telluride, certainly, Aspen, Eagle County, Pitkin, all those places. So it is pretty interesting in the Western Slope. You get kind of the very rural counties at the bottom of the cost of living, and then the three counties we're looking at today are kind of in the middle, and then you've got some of those really resort-oriented counties that have a really high cost of living that's really grown in the last 20 years. And then on this chart also, we compare it to a few of those other things that you've probably heard about. So like that federal poverty level that we talked about a little while ago. So that equates to about 20,000 a year. So you can see it's only a small fraction of what it takes this family to actually meet its basic needs. The very bottom one there, that's the income it takes to qualify for what we think of as kind of welfare programs. So like SNAP, WIC, TANF, those kind of programs, you have to have an income down in that range. So, really way below the self-sufficiency level. There's a couple other commonly used federal standards on here, minimum wage, and then the one on the far right are different levels of HUD assistance for housing assistance. It's kind of interesting, especially to see how those benefit levels are way below self-sufficiency in most cases, especially in Colorado, where we have a pretty high cost of living. So a little national comparison here. How does it compare Colorado versus other places? Definitely we're higher up there. Not a cheap state to live in. Certainly these days, and you can see, different metro areas. Denver's on here, and it's up toward the top of the chart. Only Portland and Seattle on the West Coast are a little bit higher. And then I put in there just, Routt County is actually, the self-sufficiency wage you need in Routt County for that family is higher even than Seattle. It'd be off the chart. Montrose is still kind of in the middle, all these three counties, but certainly compared to big, even big metropolitan areas around the country, it's kind of a middle level. And these are all calculated for that same family type, of course. And then just looking at it over time. So we've done the self-sufficiency standard. You can see about every 3 or 4 years. So every 3 or 4 years, going back to 2001. And the reason we do it every 3 or 4 years is, it's a big project to put this standard together. It takes a long time, so it's certainly not something we could probably do every year. But even then, it doesn't change so much year to year that it would be really makes sense to do. So every 3 or 4 years is a pretty good interval for statistical comparisons and to keep the data fresh. So we do have data going all the way back to 2001 from these standards that we've done. And you can see just for a few kind of index counties around the state, Garfield and the Western Slope, there's not too dissimilar, although they've started to have some real rapid income cost of living growth in the last few years too. But you can see generally, across Colorado, we've seen cost of living go up. Even through the Great Recession, cost of living continued to rise in Colorado. It didn't really level off even that much. And we've seen cost of living growth, especially in some counties, really skyrocket in the last half dozen years. And we're actually preparing to do another self-sufficiency standard around the end of this year, probably for release early next year. So maybe in a year or two, we can get together and do this presentation again, look at the updated numbers. We'll have the next interval coming out. The one we're talking about today is from 2018. Another look at what's changed over time. So from the very first standard that we did in 2001 to the most recent one in 2018, what changed? We used Larimer County here because it's kind of an average county in the state in terms of cost of living. So it's a pretty good benchmark, but you can also see the statewide numbers. You can see what's happened. Housing cost obviously is, no surprise there. That's gone up a lot all over Colorado, over 50% growth. Childcare, actually even more. Childcare is basically doubled in the state of Colorado. And I know some of the folks we have that work in childcare, they've told me Colorado now has the second highest cost of childcare in the country. Only New York State is higher on average. So we are really a high cost of childcare state, which is challenging, obviously, for parents. And then food costs have gone up actually a lot, more than 50%. Transportation, not too much. That's actually stayed fairly consistent, only slight growth there. But healthcare, again, that's been another thing that's really blown up. We've seen that about double in that 17-year period. And then taxes and tax credits have mostly balanced out, but because taxes minus tax credits, but taxes have grown a little faster than tax credits. So, sorry, I want to go back to that 1 second. So I just, at the bottom of this chart, the really important sort of takeaway I want you to have from this over time comparison is to look at our self-sufficiency wage, what's happened to it. So statewide, the amount of income you need to have to meet self-sufficiency has grown by 78%. So that's that sort of lower middle right there, 78%. So the income you need generally speaking, since 2001 has not quite doubled, but it's pretty close. It's gone up by 78% to meet your basic needs in Colorado. So really, some really high growth of cost of living. And we talk a lot in Colorado about strong economy, and we do have a strong economy in Colorado. We've had a lot of growth. And you can see earnings at the bottom. Earnings have also grown. They've definitely grown through that 20-year period. But the issue essentially is that earnings on average have grown by 43% in that period, whereas cost of living has grown by 78%. And that I think is a really important lesson or takeaway for public policy, because we can see that income growth, economic growth has definitely helped people. It's definitely grown people's incomes, but it has not kept up with the cost of living. So costs have grown almost twice as fast as income growth. So, the problem in Colorado that we have definitely isn't that incomes aren't growing. They are growing, but they're not growing nearly as fast as costs are going up. So as you can imagine, if you're looking at a family's budget, somebody may be getting raises, their income has been growing, but their costs of things like healthcare, housing, and childcare have gone up even a lot faster than their income has grown. And that has actually put more and more households in Colorado below self-sufficiency and in a place where they can't meet their basic needs in the last 20 years. So we're a growing state, but unfortunately our costs are growing a lot faster than our incomes. This is a nice, interesting look. I got this from State Department of Labor. We looked at the top 10 occupations in Colorado, what they pay on average, and then I just put the index line on here for that wage we were looking at for Montrose County, where that falls. And you can see, there's a few of the occupations that are common in Colorado, nurses, accountants, and so forth that on average make more than that. So, those kind of jobs will work. They'll meet self-sufficiency for people. But we also have a lot of our biggest employment areas, especially in kind of your, retail, hospitality, and of course, last year and a half now has been really rough for that industry anyway. But those jobs tend to have a tough time supporting any family, especially family that has kids. People that are single people by themselves, as we saw, they can potentially support themselves with a job like that. But supporting a family is not going to happen in that kind of employment sector. Another thing, and this is something definitely you may have questions about. I just want to give you a little overview of it, but it's a complex subject. But it's called the cliff effect. So this is essentially, it's really complex looking chart. Basically, what it is it's just showing you the interaction between various types of public assistance or public benefits and income sufficiency. So the big white area, the big black line going up to the right, that's people's income growing by hourly wage at the bottom. And as your income grows, you get more and more self-sufficient. So income growth, definitely a good thing. And then you can see those colored lines up at the top are different kinds of work supports modeled against self-sufficiency in those different categories from the standard. So we talk about the cliff effect. Basically what it means is, you're a person toward the bottom of this chart, you're making that $10, $11 an hour. You're eligible for SNAP, which is food benefits, used to be called food stamps. You're eligible for some childcare support. So those things help you be self-sufficient at that low income level, right? So if you're somebody, you're making $12 an hour, you got kids, obviously really helps to have some help with your food bill, some help with your childcare. That helps you be self-sufficient. It helps you stay in a place where you can afford your basic needs. But what happens with the cliff is you hit a certain income level, and then like on the blue line, you lose your SNAP. So, you go from making $11 to $13 an hour, you lose your SNAP benefits. Suddenly you're no longer food self-sufficient. You're unable to afford food, even though your income has gone up. So this creates a really difficult problem, kind of a perverse incentive in the economy, because it prevents people from, in many cases, getting a better job, wanting to get a raise, wanting to work more hours, because they can actually, you can take a promotion at work, get a little bit more money, a couple more bucks an hour, and you can actually be worse off. That's really the bottom line of the cliff effect. You make a little bit more money, and now you've lost one of your benefits. You've lost healthcare assistance or SNAP, And we have Cclp. We've actually extended the income levels for that. So you can see that's at a much higher level of income. You lose those childcare benefits, Cclp, but it's a big cliff when you do hit it, because childcare, as we covered, really expensive in Colorado. So when you lose those benefits for your childcare, you can go from being, doing just fine to having real trouble affording your childcare. So with all these benefits, we see these different kind of cliffs, and it's a big policy problem that we spend a lot of time worrying about, working on. How do we smooth those cliffs out? Because we want to incentivize people to do better. We want people to be able to take those better jobs. We want people to be able to take those raises, pursue additional employment opportunities, whatever they want to do in their career. Because otherwise people can actually get, sort of stuck at an income level, because they can't have their income go up a little bit without being worse off. So it's a tough problem. Now I'm going to show you just a couple of those slides I mentioned from the State of Work in Colorado report, which just came out in December. So this is kind of more up to the minute. Just want to show you a little bit of the impact of the pandemic on the economy in Colorado. So I know that's something we're all curious about, all wondering about. So this is some of our really up-to-date research that looks at the last few months of 2020, especially to see sort of what happened. And you see this is what happened to employment in Colorado over 2020. All of it basically just an unprecedented, massive hole in the economy in April, especially. And then we had a nice little rebound, and then things kind of leveled off a little bit. And it looks like the initial returns, we might be getting another nice little rebound coming back here as folks get vaccinated. Things start to open up a little bit. So that's definitely the hope. You can see huge impact there. And this next chart actually shows it by wage jobs. This is kind of what I was talking about a minute ago, where we know, restaurants, hospitality, people are working in retail, some of those businesses that had to, put a lot of restrictions in place, shut down for a while, that sort of thing. So this basically is that same chart, but by income level. So the red line are low wage jobs paying under $27,000 a year. And you see those took by far the biggest hit in that April, March, April, May period, where we lost so many jobs. Biggest hit was for low wage people. Medium wage jobs did a little bit better. They pretty much followed the trend line for all jobs. And then people in higher wage jobs saw much less of a dip. We know it basically just tells us, but what you may have heard anyway, that the pandemic's definitely been roughest on the people at the bottom of the income spectrum, because they did tend to work those jobs that were most vulnerable to disruption. People higher wages, either they have ways to keep working, they're able to work remotely, they have access to, tools to do that. So those jobs are actually much less impacting. You can see up until this one we measured until looks like about mid-September last year is our current update. And those folks in high wage jobs, they actually, even by the fall, no impact. Those jobs had all come back. That was back to even from the start of the pandemic. Whereas people in those lower wage jobs were still almost 20%. 20% of those jobs were almost still gone. So it's been a lasting impact on that bottom part of our economy for sure. And you can see this is another way to look at that. We look at change in SNAP enrollment. So again, those are food benefits, who enrolled in those. And this is by region across the state. So you see big uptick. We went from sort of our baseline in February, lots and lots of people getting on SNAP benefits. They became eligible, unfortunately, because their income dropped. And we had, big program in the state to try to get people on those benefits so they could eat and survive. So you see big impact, but especially that one line that really stands out is the rural resort areas. So some of those, ski area counties, that sort of thing. They saw a huge increase. Why? Because huge loss of those frontline retail type jobs. So that's a little look at the sort of the pandemic economy for interest. And then we're gonna pivot to that other report that I mentioned. Spend a little bit of time on that before we do questions. And that one's overlooked and undercounted. I really definitely encourage you to download this report, read the whole thing. It's pretty easy to go through. Actually, it's got a lot of good graphs and charts that kind of illustrate the data, but really it's about the people below the standard. So because we're able to do the standard for all 64 counties and all 719 family types, we're able to have really precise data about, not people by name, but, in terms of every part of the state, who has enough income to meet their basic needs and who doesn't. So total, as of 2018, when we calculated this, there were 430,000 households that were below self-sufficiency in Colorado. So didn't have enough income to meet their basic needs. A lot of households. Most of those households had people that were working. So again, this is kind of a theme in the data in Colorado. It isn't really work that's the problem, and I mean, definitely in the last year, we've had some challenges, as everybody has, but for the most part in our economy, we have a lot of employment. Unemployment numbers are low. People are working, but the jobs that they're working in a lot of cases, don't generate enough income to meet basic needs. So availability of jobs isn't really the problem. It's the income that they pay, and the relation of that to the cost of living. A lot of the folks, over the majority of folks below the standard, actually do have some college too. So we're a fairly highly educated state, and people do have quite a bit of education, and still a lot of folks not able to meet the standard. High housing cost burdens. That's something we're talking about in this region, as across most of the state. 73% of those households are burdened by high housing costs, meaning they spend a third of their income or more on housing, which is difficult to sustain a budget like that. A lot of the folks below the standard have kids. We talked about why that was. Only about 20% receive food assistance, SNAP. Why? They make too much money. Most people, as we saw, the standard to receive those kind of benefit programs, a very, very low amount of income. Most people actually have more income than that, but they're really in between the level where you can receive benefits and being able to meet basic needs. Most of those people are in that gap. So we compare this to the federal poverty line, which we talked about a little bit earlier. About 8% of households in Colorado are below that federal poverty threshold. So when you hear like poverty numbers, so people will cite, but when we do our calculation, what we find is that 27% working age. So that's working age, meaning we're excluding, seniors, folks who are over 64. So they may be on, fixed income, that sort of thing. We don't, we calculate them differently, but of working age people between 18 and 64, over a quarter of all households are below self-sufficiency. So not able to generate enough income to meet their basic needs, which is a lot. Again, this is one of those numbers I think that really jumps out in this presentation. And, I want it to stick with you when you think about it. Think about basically 1 in 4 households in Colorado can't meet their basic needs at their present income level. And then looking at race and ethnicity, we see people of color percentage wise. So that the top bar is everybody in the state. All households in Colorado are, all households total, about 73% are white. Higher percentage of those people of color are below the standard, but you can still see the majority of households, definite majority of households that are below the standard are white households. Education, we work a lot on education, but we know that's not quite sufficient. As I said, we have a lot of people with high school degrees, some college or a bachelor's degree who are below the standard. You can see it definitely does help compared to all households. Education rates are a little bit lower in those households below the standard, but it is, it's not the complete solution. It helps, but not enough. And this is, mentioned this before, but this is just a different way of looking at it. People below the standard, usually most of those households have at least one person working. A lot of them actually have 2 people working. So jobs and work aren't necessarily the problem. It's the income and the cost of living. So here we're going to look at the geography of it a little bit. Slightly different family type. This is just 1 adult and 1 preschooler in this map. But this shows you the self-sufficiency wage that you need. So you can see out on the eastern plains and down in San Luis Valley, southern Colorado, that area. That's the lowest self-sufficiency. So that's the lowest cost of living part of the state. Up western slope, metro area, northern and western Colorado, higher standard of living is required, so more expensive. And you can see the most expensive counties in the state, are definitely those either resort counties, so Summit, Pitkin, Routt, and then Boulder and Douglas, some of those more expensive counties in the metro area. And you see in your region, kind of in that middle level for all those counties. San Miguel higher. I'm sure usually I have to explain to people why that is, but you all know that's Telluride, I'm sure. So that's higher cost of living there. And then this is just a little bit different way to look at it. So this is not the wage. This is the percentage of households that fall below the standard. So this shows us sort of where we have the highest percentage of people or households that aren't able to meet their basic needs. So you can see that, Southern Colorado, especially Southeastern Colorado, Southwestern Colorado, even though the cost of living is a little lower down there, that's where we do have the highest percentage of people who aren't meeting basic needs, because basically the problem there is, jobs are paying really, much less than they do in other parts of the state by and large. And you see your three counties are not in that highest tier. They're in the next highest tier. So a little bit better, but definitely surrounded by some counties that are in that highest tier, over 35% of people unable to meet basic needs. And you can see, interestingly, like the metro area, even though the cost of living there is fairly high, the percentage of households below the standard is not as high, just, because that's where the best paying jobs are. People are able to make the most income. It's a little different way to slice that data. This looks at children. You can see especially young children. So 50% of all households in the state with young children are below the standard. 50%. So that's a lot of the households with young children. Again, that really high cost of childcare, big impact there. Children in general, though, much higher percentage. So kind of some takeaways before we get to your questions. And I see a lot of you are putting them in the Q&A, which is great. And I will get to each one of those for sure, and then we can ask some more too. But in terms of who struggles the most, just overview of the data. Some of those really rural areas of the state, we see the highest percentages. People of color definitely disproportionately affected. We didn't look at this data in depth. We do have some data in the standard if you're interested in it about people that don't have English as a first language or don't have citizenship. They tend to be below the standard at a much higher rate. Women, so that's something else that we look at in the data. Really stands out to me is that women, especially like a household that's a single woman with children, those households are some of the highest below the standard. So especially single mothers. And it's interesting, there's a one bar chart in there. I didn't have in today's slide deck, but it really stands out. Single parent father households, single parent mother households, the mother households are about 20% more likely to be below the standard. So there's a disproportionate impact on women, which I know will be interesting to your group to think about a little bit. Systematic issues, we definitely see some racism coming into play in terms of the people of color, but we also really try to emphasize sort of the poverty narrative. Colorado, especially Western Slope, we have our individualism that we take a lot of pride in. But when we talk about poverty, it's more complex than that. And I think, one of the big takeaways from the data in this report is that, even people that are working, two people in the household working oftentimes, full employment, low unemployment rates, we still really struggle to have jobs that pay enough income to meet self-sufficiency in Colorado. And it's because of our very high cost of living. It's very difficult. All right, so I have a few slides here just about sort of the policy work that we're doing, and I can share those with you all, but I do want to get to questions, so I'm not going to go through those in a lot of detail. We work on basically from a policy standpoint all aspects of what we're talking about here. So, housing, big part of that. We look at our public benefits, how we access those, the cliff effect, criminal justice reform, people that have been affected by time in the criminal justice system, much more vulnerable to being below self-sufficiency. We work on income, jobs, quality of jobs, workforce development. And then we have our sponsors here. But yeah, I want to get to questions while we have a little bit of time. because it looks like there's a bunch of good ones here. So I'm just going to go through. I can see the Q&A. So Susan, if that works for you, do you want me to just go through those to start with?
Sure, that would be fine. I also have enabled the raising hand function. So if I can help facilitate that, if people want to just ask, I can turn their mics on. But I think continuing to ask in the Q&A function is going to work best, probably.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll go through those, and if you want to put some more in there, go for it. And then if there's some raised hands, yes, Susan, help point them out to me, and we can put people on as well. So looks like there's a question: does housing include utilities? Yeah, so housing does include rent and utilities, just basic rent and utilities. So whatever your housing cost is. So it's essentially the standard. Again, it's trying to calculate sort of your basic needs. So what's the least you can do to get by? So for most people, that's renting. Although there are some areas of the state where it actually does calculate it for home ownership, where the rent market is upside down to the purchase market. But that's fairly rare in Colorado. Usually it's rent and utilities. Yeah. So that's in there too. And then another question about a thriving standard above a basic needs standard. Yes, actually, that is something we've talked about a lot. We as an organization, we tend to focus on, kind of that basic needs. How do people get by? Because we're an anti-poverty organization, we're trying to focus on the people really at the bottom of the economic pyramid. How do we get them to a place where they can, meet those basic needs and not feel that kind of stress and desperation trying to meet, put food on the table and a roof over their heads. But there is a lot of discussion, I would say, in our sort of policy areas that we work in about, what's really a thriving standard. And the discussion I've heard is that would include things like, we take the self-sufficiency standard and we'd add things like savings, because right now, meeting your basic needs means no savings. So that's just, month to month, pay your bills. But really, if people are going to thrive, they should have savings for, retirement. They should have savings for college for those kids, or, whatever they're going to do in their lives. So, they should have, leisure money, vacations, that sort of thing. And right now, this self-sufficiency standard doesn't calculate for any of that. It just says, here's what you need to do to pay your bills. So yeah, there is discussion to add a few things into that to say, what do people really need above and beyond that to be, thriving economically rather than just getting by. So I think, this standard will continue to be useful for that, but there is some discussion about that. Good question. And then question about childcare employees seem to be underpaid. Yes, yes, it's a really difficult. I could give you a whole nother presentation on the economics of childcare in Colorado. It's I know a few people that work in this field specifically in policy, and it's a very difficult problem to solve with childcare because the economics of childcare are not good. You're right. People that open a childcare, run a childcare business really struggle to make a profit. Childcare employees often are making, self-sufficiency wages themselves, $10, $12, $15 an hour. And yet, childcare is very expensive to put your kid in the childcare. So it's kind of it's a tough problem where, you want childcare employees to make enough money and you want the businesses to be able to stay open. But they're always just seems like they're right at that tipping point where, they charge a little bit more, they charge a little bit less. Just for example, during the pandemic, even though there were some specific programs aimed at keeping childcare, in business because it's an important thing we need in our society, a lot of childcares, couldn't make it because of the disruption. So, that's kind of throwing our childcare economy out of whack as well. So yeah, it's a really tough problem where it's expensive both for the parent and also difficult to make any money on the business side. And it seems it's hard to solve without some kind of, subsidy or intervention. It seems like at this point now there's a lot of people that are working on that problem. It's a good question. So next question, state of Colorado had more money than thought it had. Yeah, so that's true. So when they did kind of a pandemic budget last spring, they, as you would expect, they essentially budgeted for a worst case scenario. to make sure kind of hedge your bets. And it wasn't good, but it wasn't a worst case scenario. So there's a little bit more money in the budget than there was before. So yes, does this program benefit from that? I'm not sure what this program was in reference to. Carolyn, I don't know if you want to hop on and clarify that, but programs in general, anti-poverty programs, are benefiting a little bit. We are seeing the legislative session is happening right now again, so they're figuring out what to do with the, how to adjust the budget back up to where it actually is, knowing that there was a little more revenue than previously thought, and we are seeing a little bit of more revenue go into some of these programs because a lot of them got cut. Basically, last year, what happened was it was pretty bad. A lot of the programs that are out there to help low income people with lots of different things, benefits, really got cut severely back, which was a big hardship during a pandemic for sure. So we're actually, that's something our team's working on, making sure those get restored as much as possible. So we are seeing some benefits from that for sure. Next question is about Latinos are, yeah, that's the census. So there's demographic terms. I mean, the data for that mainly comes from the U.S. Census. So as you know, there's, how the census asks those questions is not perfect. There's a white non-Hispanic, Hispanic, non-white Hispanic, and white Hispanic. So it is a little bit of a tricky thing to unpack all of that, but yeah, if I encourage you to check out the report because it does have the methodology, how our research team broke that down, and they explain it pretty well. If you want to get into the gory demographic details, it's all in there. There's a whole appendix about that actually in there. But yes, good point. And then federal stimulus money. That's another good question. Yes, so that helps a lot. It's helping the state government and local governments patch up their budgets. And then also some of it is available to go directly to people in need. So there's some help for people directly in need. Like for example, we looked at TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. It's one of those kind of traditional welfare programs, people at the very bottom of the income level. And from like the stimulus money, it looks like we're going to be able to do an additional one-time payment to those families of about $800, which doesn't sound like a ton, but I mean if you're a TANF family, you basically have to have no income to qualify for that program. So it really, even a few $100s can make a big impact actually. So we are seeing some of those stimulus dollars flow directly to some of the families that are most in need, which is definitely a big deal. And it's helping us put back, we had to take a lot of the affordable housing money in the state had to be basically, rolled back as part of the budget cuts last year. So some of that is coming back, which will help create more affordable housing opportunities, which is really good. So yeah, there's definitely some big impacts from the federal stimulus money. It's really helpful. Just getting through the pandemic, but in general, for some of these families, it's a good boost. Has the data been used to local communities to support families? Yes. So I give this presentation, all around the state. I've done it, I think, about 30 times in the last couple of years for groups all over the place. And I actually did it one other time in Montrose in person before the pandemic, which was nice. I got to come out and be there for a day. And that was to the Region 10, which is kind of that region where you're at the Workforce Development Council down there, which is a lot of the employers. Everybody like that, the state folks who work on that, economic development folks from those three counties. And they use that. So, your folks at the county level there who are, looking at economic development, they want to know what's in this report. They use it. They always tell me it's gets pulled off of their shelf a lot. So they look at this frequently, and so do the state folks who are working on that, and so do the the employers themselves, the businesses, chamber folks. I know we had 4 or 5 county commissioners at that presentation, so they're looking at this. Yeah, I mean your local decision makers there, they really benefit from having this data. That's a lot of why we do this. It's good for everybody to kind of know this data, but especially those folks that are working on employment issues, economic development issues, all that sort of thing. They use this data a lot actually. It's an important resource, and it's lucky not every state has was not lucky. We didn't get lucky doing it. We do the work, but it's it's important for us to have this resource in Colorado because it helps us be more precise with the work that we're doing to try to make people self-sufficient. Next question is, a person who qualifies for self-sufficiency support, how would I receive support or benefits? So self-sufficiency standard by itself doesn't confer any benefits. So all those benefit programs that are set in federal law and so forth, they kick in, as we saw, they kick in at a lot lower level, usually much lower income level. So that's a lot of what we look at with policy now is how do we help people that are in between, so they're not at the very bottom where they can receive some benefits, but they're also not meeting self-sufficiency. And there's a lot of those households, as we saw, about almost 20% of households in Colorado that are in between, so they're not able to qualify for benefits, but also not able to pull in enough income to meet all of their needs. That's really the population we're talking about there. And then, sorry, I'm trying to go kind of fast because I know we're at time here, and Susan, stop me if we have to have a hard stop, but I'm just trying to answer all the questions if we have a couple extra minutes.
So we can continue to go a couple extra minutes.
Couple extra. Okay, I'll try. You have so many good questions. I want to get to them all, but I'll try to go quick here. Sure. So is the quality of housing considered high sum for some static? Yeah, and that's what I was saying. The housing measure that's in self-sufficiency is not the average cost of housing. It's intended to be the cost of housing, like how would I describe it? It's kind of like, it's supposed to be the cost of sort of the minimum cost for a livable place. So they try to set it just above where you would get someplace that's really like, unsafe, or, not even legal, renting something that's not supposed to be rented, having real problems with habitability. And, because there is a lot of those issues with housing at the low end of the market. So what they're trying to look at as a basic need is to say, what's kind of the minimum you could pay to have a place that's, at least safe to live in. So not what you might be able to pay. And that's, unfortunately for a lot of folks that are below self-sufficiency, they do end up paying less than that for housing, and sometimes ending up in those places that are, not fully habitable, we would say. Homelessness population has risen. Yes. So, I mean, definitely during the pandemic, it's been a big issue with that. But, especially in a lot of parts of Colorado, has been a long-term struggle with homelessness. And, a big part of that is just the cost of housing. There's I know a partner organization of ours we work with a lot, is the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. They do a lot of, sheltering folks and work like that. Really good stuff. But they have, it's a much higher percentage of people that are homeless that are, working full time, for example, than you would expect. And it's that same problem we illustrate in the data here, basically, that, you can be working full time, but if you're only making, kind of a minimum wage income in a lot of parts of the state, that won't get you any place to live, really. You might be living in your car. You might end up in a motel for a while. I mean, there's or you might end up in a worse situation than that. So there are a lot of people that are just not quite able to square that up with the cost of housing in the state, for sure. So and especially, I don't know if you meant during the pandemic, but definitely during the pandemic, we've seen a big spike, because people lost jobs, lost income, especially people that were, at that bottom level. They lost those jobs in large numbers. And then obviously housing was not affordable. And we did have various, measures in place, eviction, to prevent evictions, but there were actually still a lot of evictions, even though they weren't really supposed to be happening. So there are a lot of illegal lockouts and stuff. So a lot of people still ended up homeless, unfortunately. Montrose City Council investigating any childcare. Yeah, and I think that's a good example. So if the city council, counties in a lot of cases in Colorado are looking at that too. There is a lot of action you can take on the local level, especially with finding ways to support and subsidize those childcare businesses is a great example, because if you can have high quality childcare that's affordable for people, as we saw in the numbers, I mean, that's huge. If you can reduce that cost by a little bit, boy, you can bring a lot of people closer to self-sufficiency in a hurry. enable them to work more, enable them to have more consistent hours, enable them just to be able to afford those other bills that they have. And I always say this is people often ask, like what's the number one thing we should work on here? Housing, childcare, and really there's no wrong answer, right? Because if you can reduce somebody's childcare cost, that makes the whole rest of their budget more affordable, or if you can reduce their housing cost, all those other things that they're trying to afford in that calculation are going to be more possible because they've got more income they can put towards that. So I think that's really good. Actually, I'm glad to hear that. I think that is a big thing that local jurisdictions can do. A lot of them are looking at housing, a lot of them are looking at childcare, and I think this data helps them, know how to direct those efforts, which is good. So glad to hear that. How do we calculate healthcare costs? So they look at it's if you're a person that likes the methodology, I do encourage you to download the report and read it. They have our researchers will bury you in information, and happy to get in touch with them too, by the way. For anybody who's got like a detailed question about the data, I could put you in touch with one of our research team members and they could give you the full breakdown. But basically, healthcare cost is calculated on the basis of healthcare insurance in that county, which we have good data for, plus deductible and so forth. And usually we're able to use the insurance calculation now rather than out of pocket because as you probably all know, we've had a lot of success in the last 10 years getting people signed up for health coverage. Still not perfect. We still have some people that are unenrolled, but our percentages of people unenrolled in health coverage have gone way down. Since we had the state exchange now and the subsidies, there's a lot more people that are on some form of health coverage now. It's up around, I think, about 94.5% of people are covered one way or another. So they calculate it on that basis, and there are good. I know there's a good data set in the state for that. Moratorium extended, rental moratorium. Yeah, and that's a good question, Marisa, about national subsidy. Yeah, we've worked a lot on those moratoriums, and again, as I say, they haven't been perfect. There's still been some illegal evictions and stuff, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of unknowns because I don't think anybody quite knows yet. Come the end of June, are people going to be back to work enough where we don't face a wave of eviction? Because what those moratoriums have been intended to do really the whole time is keep at bay just this huge wave of evictions, because there's so many people at the lower income level who just they lost their jobs, they lost their hours, they continue to be out of work, they're unable to make their rent payments, and if we just let things proceed, we would have vast numbers of people being evicted all at once, which would be really difficult to deal with. So yeah, there's some a lot of people that are concerned about that. I would say you're right. Nobody knows exactly what to hope for. I think we're hoping we start to see some pretty rapid economic recovery as people get vaccinated and things open up a little bit. But we're not quite there. And we still see cases rising. Vaccinations are coming along, but nobody quite knows what it's going to look like. So if we get to that point, I will tell you, if we get to that point, and it looks like things aren't better, then we'll definitely advocate for an extension of that, for sure. And then Ouray and San Miguel used TANF funds to provide scholarships to families. Yes, yep, yeah. There are a lot of counties who can use some of those funds for different things. There's some flexibility that's been created in state law around how to use funds like TANF funds, which can be really helpful for some of those counties. That's good to hear. Yeah, we're very supportive of those kind of local efforts. We spend a lot of time trying to create some flexibility in state law for that. And sometimes a lot of those programs, they're mostly set in federal law, so it's the flexibility is a little bit limited, but we sure do what we can there. Oh, for childcare, yes, yeah, right, exactly. Yep, scholarships for childcare. No, those are great, because I think if you can provide people with scholarships for childcare, that's a huge boost to affordability and people being able to meet self-sufficiency. And Katie, thank you too. Appreciate it. You're welcome. And then website address. Yes. So that's a good, let me just pull that up here. If I can, I'm going to stop sharing. So we're at the end of the slides anywhere. And let me just go to the I can share with you all in the chat here. I'll send you the entire web page. And our website is Cclp Online, and then we have a resources tab. So that's just telling you how I got here. And then this, put it in the chat here for you. There you go. If you look in your chat area, you should see a link now. And that link is to the Self-Sufficiency Standard page. And it's got a clickable map, so you can click on individual counties. And there's actually a county fact sheet for each county. Breaks it down a little bit. And then if you scroll down the page a little bit, you'll see the 3 reports we talked about. You just click on them. You can download that PDF. You know, and again, they're free and available for you to use, you know, print, look at, do what you will with. And then, yeah, feel free to contact me with further questions. If you have, you know, think of something later, I could put my email in the chat here probably too. So you've got that. But yeah, thank you all for spending a chunk of your afternoon with me. I think this is, it's just really important information to know, you know, if you're politically involved, sort of, you know, what challenges people really face, how our economy really works, kind of that interplay between income and cost of living. Yeah, I'm happy to share that with you. And, you know, let's definitely stay in touch.
Thank you for joining us for this presentation. I hope you found it interesting, that you'll share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll encourage them to keep informed about issues that the League shares with our community. Remember, there are recordings of these and our other presentations, as well as information on other important topics at our website, lwvmontrose.org. Have a great rest of your day.